Thanks. This is great. There's a ton of people here, way more than I have at my gigs normally, which is great. Why don't you guys come? That'd be nice. So thank you guys for having me here. This is really special, and to see so many people this early in the morning looking this sprightly is surprising. But for those of you in the room who know me, I'm doing something very different today, which is I'm working off of notes. I turned 40. I'm definitely approaching sclerosis. Yes, it's happening. So I also expect that there'll be a large cane that will pull me off at some point because I demand that. So, all right, thank you very much. Thanks. Monty and I, we know each other here. So I'm a recovering English major, and I've had the strangest fucking career one could possibly have. And I think this topic was a good one for me in particular because my path has been so bizarre and so odd and so strange. And as an English major, I do know what serendipity means, but I figured I'd actually tell you guys in case you wanted to know. So the definition of serendipity is the faculty or phenomenon of finding valuable or agreeable things not sought for, an aptitude for making desirable discoveries by accident, and the occurrence and development of events by chance in a happy or beneficial way. And I think that the element of chance is a really interesting one for me since my life is an exercise in mitigating chance and reducing chance. In finding ways to just simply minimize the negative aspects of chance which can crop up in our lives. I'm a music producer. I have budgets. I have timelines. I have to be sure that things get done and they get done in the right way. And managing the clock, ending on time, making sure all the production gets done, this is really important. So in the effort to minimize chance, I actually realized in the process of preparing for this, I have been maximizing my opportunity for serendipity, which is exactly what's happened over the course of my life. The fewer possibilities and probabilities there are, the easier they are to actually predict and to manipulate, and I mean that in the best way possible. And that's what I've done over the course of my life. And I've been in the music business since I was about this big. I'll be in it until, well, the end, I'm sure. But I've operated under a few guiding principles in my life, most of which came from my parents and which have been continually reinforced, like, as Samantha here knows, every single day. And I wanted to list them up for you because I think they're actually kind of illustrative. But one is fail as quickly as humanly possible and figure out what not to do. This is my number one thing. And whenever I speak at universities or events like this, I generally like to talk about what not to do because that's an important thing to know. The second thing is the modern version of the golden rule, don't be a dick. It's astonishing how many people in the music industry don't actually remember this. Another big one is there's no such thing as a self-made man. This is a fallacy that I think that we've been all led to believe that we bootstrap ourselves. And I'll talk about bootstrapping in a little while, but there is no such thing. We're all standing on the shoulders of somebody else. The thing I've learned over my life is that talent is absolutely everywhere. It is a given. There is talent all over the world. Brilliant musicians, brilliant artists, brilliant people. What is not all over the world is the proclivity and ability to collaborate and compromise. And compromise is not a dirty word. Consensus is probably the best thing you can achieve in life. My friends think that I'm a CEO and I bang my gavel and I tell people what to do, but the truth is I got to make sure everybody's on board with doing what I want to do before I actually do it. I think you need to be careful what you ask for. I'll get to that in a minute too. That's bigger than a bread box. A very important one, which I learned, is that if somebody has an ugly baby, and if they say, what do you think of my baby? You should tell them it's a fucking ugly baby. I mean, I think that's important, and I think actually that's one of the reasons why people trust me to make music. Is I will tell them that's a bad idea, man, and a lot of people don't say that, and it's an important thing to keep in mind, I think, in life in general. But the most important thing that I was taught by my parents and in my experience in the music industry is that absolutely anything is possible. There is nothing which is off limits, and the strangest dreams that you have as a child, they can come true if you simply follow your bliss. So I guess the big question here is really to figure out how I went from this. It's the only picture I could find, okay? To this, to this, to this, to don't even ask about this. And finally to this, which is my company, Primer Recordings, which we're down on Route 1 on the Seacoast. And it's been a crazy journey over all these years. So I guess I can probably move on the next slide, right? Yeah, there we go. All right. But I'll give you guys a quick primer on how this all happened, and then obviously open up to some Q&A. So I guess I grew up thinking I could be a third-rate bass player in a fourth-rate band and make first-rate royalties. I think that was what my assumption was growing up. I grew up in a time when physical product was something that was vended and sold and made money. It doesn't exist anymore. If you listen to music, you're listening to it, I hope, on these. It's the best way to do it. But growing up, I was the last class in my school to have no internet. I learned how to type on a typewriter. I didn't have a cell phone. The next year, it was all, what's this email thing, when I went away to college. So I'm right on the cusp. I was licking envelopes and sending out my newsletters when I was a kid and hoping people came to the gigs, like I hope you come to my gigs. I listened to all kinds of music when I was a boy. The Beatles, oldies, Jerry Lee Lewis, Elvis, Four Seasons. And as I got older, I began to get more into the kind of heavy rock side of stuff. And I heard The Who. And I said, that's it. That's what I want to do with my life. I heard the bass player, John Entwistle, play. And I said, that's exactly what it's going to be for me. So I began to play in bands when I was in my pre-teens. Started playing, organizing, playing gigs, little gigs here and there around town, school stuff, of course. But there was a real competition in my school. There's a batch of about maybe 8 or so of us in my graduating class who are all involved very meaningfully and professionally in the music industry. And there's something in the water in the town that I grew up. But we were collaborative, but we were very competitive. And it was a wonderful thing to be able to measure yourself up against your peers in a way that was productive and helpful. And I still text with a lot of these guys every single day and email, and we still collaborate, which is a crazy thing, 20-something, 5 years on the line. But so I wanted to be a rock star. That was the goal. Pete Townsend, watched him jump up in the air. First picture of myself in the newspaper was me doing a Pete Townsend jump, and they misspelled my name, and I was psyched. And that was really it. But there was no career path. There's no manual that says this is how you become a rock star. There's no manual for getting in the music industry. There's no path. There's no route. There's no clear, no clear schematic for how to construct a life in the arts or in music. In classical music, which is where I've ended up, and I'll get to that in a minute, there is. There's, you have somebody and they're rapping at your knuckles with a ruler, and you got to play your Bach at age 3, and you go to conservatory, and chances are you're going to end up either teaching or maybe in the very back of the second violin section if you're lucky. And the thing about that is that if you're in the back of the second violin section, just going dot, 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 well, you were a star when you were a kid. You were the #1 violinist in your town, and your parents loved you, and your family thinks you're a superstar, and you're relegated to what is in essence a day job. I didn't want that, and I didn't know how to go about doing what I had to do. So it was a lot of failure in the early days trying to figure it all out. But I had a couple bands together. We were doing, I had one band that had horns and backup singers and all kinds of crazy stuff, and a hardcore band and a rock band, original music covers, all kinds of things. But at about my mid-teens, I went on my first little mini tour after doing a bunch of kind of local gigs and stuff, and we went away to New York. It was a glorified long weekend, but still, you're 15 and a half years old and you're on the road playing music. And I remember I was 15 and a half because I was in Ithaca playing the first gig of the tour, and I'm getting my amp set up and I'm getting everything all together, and these 2 girls, tall college girls, walk up to me with the plastic Solo cups with the beer in them, and they look at me, they go, how old are you? And I said, 15 and a half. And that half year wasn't so important until last year when it was 39 and a half. And then, but so from that point on, I said, this is really professionally what I want to be doing. But I didn't want to learn about music in terms of all the details and the real information that's necessary to make music. I felt that somehow it would take away the mystery of it. My teacher, when I was a kid, he said, listen, you got a great ear, you're a great player, you're a natural. Don't worry about the technical aspects of music. He's like, it'll come. And he was right. It did. I went away to college, but I didn't study music. I studied English, which was the best thing I could have done because it taught me how to communicate. It taught me about clarity of expression, taught me about how to be efficient and optimized in my writing and in my negotiations and in my dealings with people. And even at that age, I was booking gigs at like a very young age, so I had to figure out, well, how am I going to make this all go? I went up to UVM in Vermont to go to school. I was told there was a great music scene up there. I was woefully misinformed. It was like a couple of cows, Canada, and fish. And You know, it wasn't really for me. So one of my good buddies who I had a band with in high school, we did a lot of playing together, and he was down here at UNH, and this is in '96. I called him up and I said, how's it going for you down there? He said, shitty. And he said, how's it going for you? I said, really shitty. And I said, well, you know, if I transferred down, would you want to get a band together again? And he goes, I'm not going to tell you to do it, but if you did it, that'd be pretty cool. So I did, and that was 21 years ago. And I started the band that I still have now, which is called Dreadnought. And we've been around, all right? And actually, see, you know, I made notes to myself not to swear. But I'm Italian. I need like little schmatties in case I sweat. And the fact is, I did tell Monty. I said this morning. I said, "You make that room as fucking cold as possible. Otherwise, I'm not coming in." But I was told, 21 years in, many albums, many awards, many tours, many great gigs with famous people. Later, I was told by a close colleague that my band fails in 3 regards. 1, you can't dance to it. 2, you can't talk over it. And 3, you can't fuck to it. And I said, well, that's basically it. So my life is strictly non-commercial in that regard. But in the context of playing in the band, we started off as a larger band playing at UNH. We were doing a lot of gigs, and you know, like a college band does. But we started to go further and further afield, and get out there and start to tour and go across the country. In about the year 2001, we were at that point a trio, and we were getting involved in crazy stuff, crazy music, like, you know, avant-garde music, way out there, free jazz, classical stuff. You know, when I was in my late teens, I heard Stravinsky, and I said, all right, that is it. You know, that was the other side of the musical coin for me, was hearing the classical and the serious stuff that I liked. So Dreadnought, we tried to put this all together in this album that we made in the year 2001. And when we made the record, we realized we had something pretty cool, and we went out on the road and we toured behind it. And that was a really crazy experience. But the first record we put out, which was not a popular record, which didn't do anything for us professionally, the first line of the first review of my first album began with, sometimes when you go out on a limb, the limb breaks. And I am forever grateful for that review, because it told me exactly what I should expect in the rest of my career. And so anyway, so the 3 of us, we started playing and really going out on the road and doing a lot of touring and a lot of gigging. And we played with some great folks like Tony Levin, who's the bass player for Peter Gabriel and King Crimson, NRBQ, which is one of my favorite groups. We ended up opening up for John Entwistle from The Who, which is another, that's an hour-long story I could tell you guys on another day, which was a crazy thing. And to get to hang out with your idol, and, you know, ended up on the tour bus after the gig and playing bass with each other and just kind of, you know, exchanging notes, that was a dream come true. And a buddy of mine said, you know, if you drop dead today, he's like, you're done. I said, yeah, no, I'm done. That's cool. But we had an interesting happen. So the goal of playing in a band for me, I think for all kids of my generation, was you wanted to get signed. You wanted to get a record label to pay you to do what it is that you think you do best. And I worked so hard at this, you know, I mean, emails and phone calls, and I was unrelenting. And at this point, I was running my own small record company down here in the Seacoast, running my own booking agency, had a bunch of bands. I was booking bands, I was booking venues, I was doing all kinds of crazy stuff, and I was trying to get it signed. So we got signed to a couple little record labels, one in Seattle, a label in Russia picked up a couple of our records, a label in France, I think, did 2. And finally, I got a hold of this label in Italy. And as I said, I'm of Italian descent, so somehow this felt right to me. And I said, oh, great. And these guys said, yeah, we'd like to pay you some cash to make a record. So we got the contract, and the contract looked fine. And they're going to actually pay us money, cash in the barrel, had to do this, which was astonishing. And I got down about halfway through the contract, and there was a creative repertoire clause. And that basically means that the label will have the right to dictate a portion of what it is that you are choosing to record. Major label deal will basically say, well, if we don't like any of it, we're going to throw it away and you're screwed. In this case, it said that they had the ability to dictate, I think it was 15% of the overall repertoire that I was going to select. And the repertoire in rock and roll, in my kind of music, being my stuff. If you're a classical guy, your repertoire might be Beethoven, it might be Brahms, it might be Aaron Copland, but this is my own material. And I said, in my mind, I'm getting paid to make my own art. So I'm sitting down with my attorney at the time, who was former Congressman Paul Hodes, a good friend. And Paul and I are looking at the contract, and I got to this clause. I said, Paul, I'm really uncomfortable with this. He goes, listen, Bob, he's like, you got shit for prospects. You can't even afford to pay me. He goes, I'd sign the deal, you know? Paul's a pragmatist, right? And he was right, So I signed the deal, and about a week later, I got an email, and the label contact said, "Hey, listen, I think you guys should record a piece by Frank Zappa." And I love Frank Zappa. I'm a huge Zappa fan. I said, "Okay, all right, fine." I didn't really want to do it, but okay, fine. The next week, I get another email saying, I think you guys should record Dark Star by the Grateful Dead. Now, I like the Dead fine, right? Not my bag necessarily, and at that point I'm thinking, this is just a slippery slope. I can see where this is all going to go, and I went back to Paul. And I said, "Paul, listen, I got a problem. They want us to record some stuff that I don't really want to do." And he looks at me and goes, "Did you cash the check?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "You're fucked." And so we made the record, but the end result was that I got a glimpse down in a very small, short dollar, controllable way of compromise of a bad sort, and what my life might look like if I were to go down that path. And I realized that in trying to get what I wanted so deeply, which was for somebody else to believe in me and to subsidize my work and to pay for me to make my art, I had compromised, in a small way, the only thing that ever mattered in the first place, which was the art, was the music. So that was kind of a profound realization. I kind of logged that in the back of my head, and it ended up coming in handy a lot later when I started my company, Parma. But my experience in working with Dreadnought in the studio and making a ton of records, it led me to think about how I could possibly make more money by writing music, and to get into things like custom audio composition. So writing music for independent films and ad agencies and television programs and stuff like this. So I was pretty good at it. I have a pretty good, I think, a pretty decent musical skill, and I learned how to be able to take a dart and throw it against a dartboard and basically hit a bullseye on behalf of a client. So I was doing all these kinds of projects for different companies. I actually made quite a bit of money writing music for softcore pornography, which it's great work if you can get it. It's not a joke, I really did. And that's how I got the down payment for my house. But I remember I was driving around and I was listening to New Hampshire Public Radio, and I heard The Exchange. It's true. I heard The Exchange, and it was on the air. I listened to it every morning driving around. And I said, God, every day I'd sit there like, this music, it sucks, it sucks, it sucks. And so finally I said, I can't take this anymore. And I sent an email to Mike Rogers, the program director of New Hampshire Public Radio, and I said, Mike, you have an exceedingly ugly baby. And he wrote back, he said, it's interesting, tell me more. So I went in for a meeting and I told him, I said, your music sucks and I'd like to help. And so we talked about it, and it looked like it wasn't going to be in the cards because of the budget at that time. And this was back in 05, 06. He said, we can't make it work this time, but he said, I got something else for you. He says, we're working on a project with the Music Hall in Portsmouth, and it's bringing in writers on book tour, and they want some kind of like quirky band, maybe a trio that's kind of like New England-y, kind of rock. You know anybody like that, Bob? I'm like, yeah, I think I do. So my consolation prize was actually becoming the music director and house band for Writers on a New England Stage here at the Music Hall, which I've been doing for 12 years now. It has been an honor and a privilege. I got to meet and work with Patricia Lynch, who is the executive director of the venue and of this venue. And it's been terrific. We've gotten to work with some of the most amazing people you could imagine, Supreme Court justices, famous authors, crazy dudes, it's a lot of fun. And I loved it. And it was such an interesting thing for me to realize that this confluence of events, like other things, there was a meaning and a purpose to it that might not be because the music of the spheres wanted me to do it, but simply because probability. And, these things had kind of whittled themselves down to me getting a gig and then me kind of, working on it and making it happen. So it's been a great time working here at the Music Hall, and I've loved it my whole time with my group. I did get the gig to write the theme song for The Exchange, which probably is playing like right now. It's been airing for like 12 years, and at this point, I can't stand it. Now, I actually called Betsy Gardell. I said, hey, listen, that theme music you have, it kind of sucks. If you want me to redo it, I'll do it. I'd be happy to do it. So, but anyway, so I'll accelerate a bit here, but at that time I was getting more and more involved in classical music and more involved in serious composition because I had to, in terms of my day gig of writing music for custom audio jobs. I also was really passionate about it. I never felt passion for Beethoven and Mozart and these things when I was a kid, although, Kilda Wabbit from Warner Brothers, and Tom and Jerry and Mr. Rogers. These were things that I heard and I think were very appealing to me, and I always loved. But it wasn't until, like I said, I heard Stravinsky and Manuel de Falla, who's a Spanish, a Catalan composer, and Bela Bartok, that I began to understand this music in a different way. And it was the rhythms and the harmonies and the dissonances of it that appealed to me much more so than kind of the wallpaper-esque beauty that I think people usually associate with most classical music, which of course, now that I'm an old sclerotic man, I recognize that Bach, as simple as he is in so many ways, is really the king. But this is the arc of one's understanding in any kind of artistic sense. But I decided to go talk to a company called MMC Recordings near where I lived in Massachusetts, or where I grew up in Massachusetts. And it turns out these guys were doing a lot of great work with great musicians, huge names, London Symphony Orchestra, Seattle Symphony Orchestra, Grammy winners, Pulitzer Prize winners, and they're right down the road from where I grew up. So I went down for a meeting. I set up a meeting because I was curious and I needed some ensembles and players to do some of the work I was doing. So I figured I was going to like a classical music company, And so I drive to North Reading and I pull up to this old house, decrepit old historical home, and I walk to the door and it's like garbage everywhere. It was a mess. It was a mess. And I knock on the door opens up like this, and there's this like apparition. And it was this dude, and he looked like a deranged Santa Claus, right? He had like white hair like this, a beard like this. He had like one tooth right here. He was wearing nothing but a coffee-stained V-necked T-shirt with threadbare underpants, holding a cigarette. I remember looking up and down. I looked down, and I remember looking at his toenails, and they looked like kryptonite. And he looks at me, and he goes, "Hey, man," and thus began 3 of the strangest years of my life. And this guy's name was William Thomas McKinley. And Tom, he was a student of Aaron Copland and Gunther Schuller as a classical guy. As a jazz guy, he played with Stan Getz and Dexter Gordon and Scott LaFaro. One of the only people I've met in my life who has such proclivity in such different music styles, which is what I have always been passionate about. So in him, I saw what I thought to be a model and a way forward. It was an amazing 3 years. I'd never worked for anybody else in my life, and I never have since. And essentially, my conditions for going to work for him was leave me alone. And he did. And he got to focus on his composition, and I got to run this company, which was a tremendous experience for me. And I loved doing it. And I was able to bring in eventually my own people from my own companies and to kind of mold it in my own way. But from there is where I began to get my experience seriously working in classical music as a producer and as a marketer and as a label guy. I'd had my own record labels, I'd had my own booking agencies, as I said, but this was different. This was a different game. Tom would sit down in his living room and he would have 2 pianos side by side with music on them. And by music, I mean sheets of paper this big, right? Like or orchestral staff paper. And there would be, so they were double, so there'd be 2, 3, there'd be 6 of them like this, taped together like that on 2 pianos. And he'd go from piano to piano, and all you'd hear for like 20 minutes would be he'd play a chord, and then he'd just write. And then maybe he'd voice another chord, maybe try a little different color here, different voicing, and then he'd write. And he'd bang out like a concerto, like a 20-minute concerto in like a week. I mean, it was insane to watch this guy and hear this guy work. And his music was tremendous. He passed away last year. I miss him terribly. He was a great guy. I loved him dearly. He was a musical genius. He was an absolutely horrific businessman. He was of, at best, nebulous morality and ethics. And my job was to fend him off with a sharp stick while I did what was right for the artists and for the musicians. And I'll accelerate, but I do have one really great story I got to tell about Tom. I can't let this thing go. It's too great. We were at a rehearsal for one of his pieces down in Boston. I took him down to the rehearsal. We had the orchestra in there, and we're sitting with the orchestra, and it's in like a gymnasium kind of setting. And the orchestra was rehearsing, and Tom and I were sitting there, and Tom couldn't sit still. Whenever anyone would play, he'd be like this, and just be like doing all this kind of stuff. And this is like a 70-year-old guy, right? He's like he was like, they had a composition at New England Conservatory. Like, this is one of the best, most well-known schools in the country. And so the conductor said, he's like, all right, guys, all right, we're gonna do one more take of bars, 40 to 80, and then we're gonna take a break. At that point, Tom immediately got up and walked away. I went, okay. So I'm just sitting there waiting. I'm listening to the orchestra. I get the score. I'm focusing. Tom comes back and he reeks of weed. And I looked at Tom and I went, Tom, what did you do? He goes, nothing. Fine. And then all the players went out, they got done, and they went to go use the men's room and the ladies' room. I said, Tom, where did you go? He goes, I went to the men's room. I went, oh my God. And they all came back from using the pisser, right? And they're all just like laughing hysterically. And that was Tom McKinley. He really didn't care, and he was an incredible guy. I ended up acquiring the company that I worked for from Tom for $1, and I threw in a hot dog to sweeten the deal. And it did get the deal done, thankfully. But it was after 3 years of working for Tom, I realized I had to do my own thing, and that I didn't necessarily agree with Tom's feelings. I'm an only child. I've always run my own companies. I'd never had a job working for anybody else before since that, other than a work-study gig, and it was untenable for me. So I said, I know exactly how to do this, and more importantly, Tom, thank you, Tom, taught me exactly what not to do. He taught me exactly how not to behave. He taught me exactly all the things that I should not be paying attention to, and essentially all the moves I shouldn't be making. So I decided to start Parma 9 years ago this month, and it's gone like so quickly, it's unbelievable. But I said, you know what? I'm going to start this thing, and I started it in 2008 at the bottom of the economy, the absolute worst time anybody could do anything, and everyone told me I was completely insane. I said, I know that, but I'm doing it anyway. And the idea was to take what I had done at MMC, to take my experience with the deal with the Italian record label where I had compromised myself, to take my work as a booking agent, as a 15-and-a-half-year-old kid, kind of, get it all together and say, well, what is it that I really wanted? And what I really wanted in life was to have all the control and none of the responsibility. I mean, that's basically one's dream. So I said, and I thought about Tom, and I said, here's a guy who, a supreme musician, supremely talented, but yet he couldn't focus on the music because he was trying to run this company and trying to do all these other different things. I said, well, if I could create essentially a turnkey solution for a composer, for an ensemble, for a musician, to be able to do everything in the life cycle of a musical project, from project planning to contracting to in-studio production to post-production, release, editing, mixing, mastering, distribution, marketing, licensing, well, somebody could come to me and my whole crew could handle that, and we'd be able to do everything without having to subcontract anything. No vendors, no arguments, no timelines getting screwed up, and that's what I did. Started off, I did bootstrap it, but I had people with me and I had help. No financial help. I started from scratch, and it ended up working, strangely enough. I don't know how that happened, but we've built the company up to about 18 folks now, and Samantha, who's here with me, and Sarah, who's here as well, are both in the team, and we have a great time. We go bowling, we go see movies together, and we also travel the world and make music. So I've been really lucky to be able to go to different countries, work with musicians in these different countries to record the works of our artists and our composers. And our job is to protect our people. Our job is to protect our artists, to protect our composers, because they might not understand the idiosyncrasies of contracts and intellectual property and the fact that we're listening to music on these things now and all these other kind of details that are hard to master. And that's really our job, is to act responsibly on their behalf, to exploit their intellectual property for their benefit and for ours, and to make great music doing it. So I achieved another lifetime kind of dream by working with the guy you saw a picture of up there, which is Pete Townsend, and it was only because I was working in classical music that happened. If I was in rock and roll, and if I approached Pete about doing something, it never would have happened. It was because it was classical music, because it was something different that he was passionate about. And I remember when we were connected, I was connected with his manager to help kind of get a stalled project going again, and to help to produce it and to bring it to market. And so I sent my details to the manager, and who's no longer alive, unfortunately. He's a great guy, and said basically, this is who I am, this is what I do, and this is the whole bag. So I'm sitting in the car at the supermarket down the road here on Route 1, and I get a phone call from overseas, and I realized, this probably him. So I picked up the phone, and it was. He said, Bob, this is Nick. I spoke with Pete. We're both very interested. You seem like a very interesting man, and you have a great project going, so tell me, what do you propose? And I said, Nick, my offer is this, nothing. It's exactly what I told him, and he said, jolly good, Bob, jolly good. And within about a week, we had a deal done, and we got to do a project together. And that was a big moment for me, was to go from being a little kid, little 12-year-old kid, trying to jump around and sound like Pete Townsend, to actually getting to work with the guy that you wanted to be like the whole time, and it was great. And so now, today, we record in Russia, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Romania, Cuba, we're doing a lot of work in Cuba, which has been terrific and a wild experience for the whole company and for me personally. Headed back to the Czech Republic this summer, going to Poland for the first time to record. So I get to have my cake and eat it too. It's a fun life. The downside, as my employees know, is I work about 16 hours a day. I was up at 3 a.m. the last few days, and I don't get to sleep too much. But that's because I'm getting to do what I love to do. And today is an interesting day because it's somewhat coming full circle. About 15 or 16 years ago, Dreadnought, when our original drummer was going on a brief hiatus, we said, you know what, we have a bunch of tunes that we want to record, but we don't have the mechanism to do it, so why don't we just put them down really quickly and put one of these little things out and get it, and just so we can remember the tunes, which we promptly forgot about for 10 years. And so 5 years ago, I was going through some old tapes, talking about Serendipity, and I found this tape. I went, what the hell is this? And sure enough, it was all these tracks that we written all these years ago that we completely forgot about. And I played it for the guys, and they went, oh my God, I can't believe we forgot about this. So we began to record that material. We put out 2 EPs in the last 4 years that was based upon those tracks. And today, our new album goes on pre-sale. And it includes a lot of the tracks that were in that time capsule from 15 years ago, plus a whole lot of new stuff. So I guess I'm coming back all the way around to, I tried to abandon my life as a musician so I could be a producer and to help other people and to put them in front of me. And now today, in the next few months, I'm getting back to myself. And it should be a fun summer for me. So I'm glad to have been here, and thank you all for coming, and thanks for having me.